Hello. Hello. Welcome back. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's play briefing for PRIMA FACIE. I got it right. Oh my gosh, not PRIMA FACIE or something else, which we might talk about later, by Suzie Miller. Before we begin tonight, I'd just like to honour the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Turrbal and Yagara people. This has always been a place of storytelling. Tonight and the entire season of PRIMA FACIE has been made possible by our principal partner, RACQ. My name is Daniel Evans. I'm not Lee Lewis. I am an associate artist here at Queensland Theatre, and it is my pleasure to be with you all tonight as your MC. Artistic director, Lee Lewis, is in the director chair this evening, so tonight is our chance to peek inside her directorial brain, so get all of those questions ready. Now, if you've joined us last month, you'll have been treated to the black comedy White Pearl. And for our next production, we're staying in the workplace, but we're going to dial things up a notch in a razor-sharp script by lawyer-turned-playwright Suzie Miller. Featuring a tour de force production brought to you by the people to my left. Tonight, we are joined by performer Sheridan Harbridge, director Lee Lewis, and stage manager Kim Scott. Round of applause. It is a little lonely up here this evening, but that's because many of our creators couldn't be here tonight because of COVID. But thankfully, the entire team here at Queensland Theatre is rallying around this production, and we are zooming in the technical team so that they can plot, preview, and fine-tune from a distance to open this Friday evening. It's a brave new world, you guys. One final piece of housekeeping, and this is quite serious, that I must warn you that tonight's briefing may contain frank discussion around sexual assault. So if at any point you find yourself, you might need a little breather, that's totally okay. Please feel free to remove yourself and go grab some air. So I'm going to talk for a bit longer, then I'm going to hand over to these guys. And by way of introduction to this work, which first premiered at Griffin Theatre in 2019, let me read you a little précis. One woman stands centre stage, Tessa, a criminal lawyer at the top of her game, who knows the law permits no room for emotion. To win, you just need to believe in the rules. And Tessa loves to win, even when defending clients accused of sexual assault. But when she finds herself on the other side of the bar, Tessa is forced into the shadows of doubt she has so ruthlessly cast over other women. When the tables turn on Tessa, we are given a production that exposes the shortcomings of a patriarchal justice system where it's her word against his. Suzie Miller is ensconced in Sydney tonight, but I have reached out to her to ask her where this work came from, and she had this to say earlier today. The play comes from a lifetime of asking the same questions of the law. We were taught that all the elements of the legal system are supposed to create justice, and therefore lawyers can rely so much on the system that they can argue for their client and know that whatever they argue, the system itself will figure out the truth and then find the best result. But then, what happens when you realise that in certain situations, the system does not work? That for women in sexual assault situations, their story does not fit the way the system works, and justice can't be done. So basically, I wanted to show how it happens. And to do that, theatre was the best tool. It is true that prior to the Me Too movement, and indeed having a woman artistic director of a company, no one did want to hear these stories. I was afraid at the time by writing this that I would be stereotyped as the usual angry woman, but as it turns out, the whole world is speaking and listening. I am not alone, and nor am I rejected because I feel the paradoxical nature of the law that wants to protect those who need justice. Writing is a lonely business, Suzie says. One's brain is filled with the words and the world you want to create. You know your characters, their lives, their stories. But it's not until an audience comes to them that they live in the world. Sheridan Harbridge is an astonishing actor. I feel blessed that she became Tessa. She truly took this character and made her live and breathe and reach out to the audiences across the nation. So, to start, Lee Lewis, I'm going to come to you. I might get you to introduce the work, and can you tell me, when did you first encounter this idea or this script?
I first read the first half of this script in the Griffin Award back in 2018, I think it was, and it won the award with half of the story. So it got up to interval. And then I really wanted to do the play, so that's the benefit of being an artistic director. I went to Suzie, and she just won the award, and I said, Suzie, it's really great. She said, well, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? I said, I reckon there's more there. I reckon we need more. I don't think it's enough to say this happened. I think we need to actually know, and then what happened? How did she deal with it? And so she's an astonishing woman. I wish she could be here tonight because I could embarrass her with telling her how extraordinary I think she is. But she went away. We didn't talk about it again for a few months. And she came back and she said, I've finished it. You were right, there was a second half. I'm like, okay, I don't remember saying a second half. And then I read the play and I just went, this has to be on a stage. I don't know how it's gonna meet the audience, but she was saying things as an ex-lawyer that I hadn't heard articulated in the theatre before. And I thought part of the job with a new work is to put it out to an audience and see what an audience thinks. So we put it into the season, and you just don't know with a new play until your audience decides. And it hit the audience like a wave of finally was the feeling. Finally, this is something that rings true. And while it's not, I think it was important that the people were waiting for a fictional telling, for it not to be about a real story. It's not Suzie's story, it's a distillation of so many stories that she encountered as a lawyer, and that friends of hers encountered. And it leapt into people in a way that was surprising, I think, for her. Definitely surprising for you. Again, it's that magic thing with new work. It's a big leap of faith on everybody's part, and then you see. And sometimes magically, something is necessary at a time, and it takes off, and you can feel it happen in the audience. And the first night of the show, there were a number of survivors of sexual assault and sexual harassment who were in the audience, who we'd talked to, and they were willing to sit in the audience and see what it was like to hear the show, to see if we needed to pull it back, previews, that's what we do. I very nervously went up to them and said, how is this? And they were like, oh yeah. And I was like, that was a bit, that's kind of all, it's that, it's brutal, it's like the Roman thing, I knew I was only getting thumbs up or thumbs down, and they were like, yep, okay. And I was like, all right, so step by step, it's been that. And each night, people hearing the story, and then of course it was off and away, and then COVID. So coming back to it now, strangely, sadly, it feels good. Actually, it feels good.
Good.
It feels good to be coming back to it now. The world has changed a little bit out underneath the play. It's not quite a slap in the face as it was before. It feels part of the conversation, not starting a conversation. But that's good. It's a good, rich work to be in the conversation for the same reason. I'm sorry, I've forgotten what the question was.
No,
sorry, you have to stop me.
You've
You've
answered the next 5 questions, so that's totally fine. Sheridan, what jumped out at you when you first read this play, when you closed perhaps the last page of the script? Do you remember what you sat with afterwards? Was it a visceral kind of thing? What happened to you?
I remember actually, I read the first page, and I had to read the first page while I was at an ice hockey match in LA. It was very strange because the story with this, the original production had cast actress Kate Mulvaney, and she got an incredible gig with Al Pacino. So I got the call for her sloppy seconds, which I willingly take. But Griffin, because the season was about to launch, needed an answer very quickly, and I was at an ice hockey game in LA, and just was like, oh, okay. Woo, so cheery. And then I just read the first page and went, oh, I have to play this role. And that wasn't sort of like an arrogant thing. It was more, it was definitely a role that was sort of probably a distillation of all of the roles I'd played over the last 15 years of my career. And I went, oh, I am perfectly primed to sort of take on this woman. So that was super exciting, and the reason why, it was because it's a role that has so much direct address to the audience, and I'd done a lot of sort of cabaret, a lot of improv, a lot of those kind of things that I went, that's actually a really great skill to take into this show. There is, you know, the wall comes up and it comes down with the audience all the time. And that's what makes her quite a warm and interesting character. But getting then to the end of the script, you just are kind of, there is an overwhelming arc in the show. Like, it is an overwhelming journey she goes on. That you go, I was first struck by the fact that I'd never seen a piece of theatre where it was actually about the act of a sexual assault and what it does to someone. I was suddenly struck with the notion that anything I'd ever seen, sex assault was just a plot point that changed someone else's journey. And it was the first time that I'd seen an hour and a half of actually pulling apart the outlay, the cataclysm that happens to someone. And that's why I was very excited to take it on.
It sounds quite bleak when you put it like that, an hour and a half. It's a big journey she goes on. She starts the play as a very successful young lawyer, young barrister who's kicking goals. Sort of that thing of where the universe starts to, all the work adds up and you catch the wave of success. And that's what's so attractive about her at the beginning, that picture of a successful woman, what that looks like now, what a young, successful woman looks like, and what that confidence looks like when you can take it for granted that the work adds up and the rewards come, yeah? And that starting point is just so great. And then you see the impact of a single act on a person and what that does. So it does go on quite a ride, but she's a sort of the starting point is really positive, and I think that's what's so attractive about the play, is that it's not a bleak telling, it's a complex telling.
Coming back to it, you know, with that 2-year gap, I'd sort of forgotten, which was great, of actually what that journey is. And it was beautiful to come back to it and remember that it's actually a story of hope. By the end, it's someone hoping, wishing and knowing for change. So it feels more like a call to arms and a question. It's a proposition. It's not actually watching someone fall apart. It's seeing them fortify and go, we can do something. So it's actually very hopeful, and it's a lovely journey. As an actor, I'm not sort of left in a devastated pool. I'm up again at the end, and that's I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's been the, going back to the original production, what was the reaction to the work? Do you remember people accosting you afterwards, or were they angry? Were they thankful? What were some of the reactions you had from the audiences afterwards?
I had a suit. It's a very big mix. There was the aspect of survivors being in the audience, and that was always really quite confronting. You know, they would either flee or want to talk to you, and that was a beautiful honour to sort of feel like you were being a face of something that they'd been through, and had some actually really beautiful reactions for people. It was a very strong thing for them to see. Then on the flip side, we had a hell of a lot of lawyers come. They wanted to see it, and you know, lawyers, I've discovered, are just like actors. They love to hear about themselves. They loved, you know, us pulling apart the and Susie's so specific in this world. That's what makes it such a great show, because she knows it so well. The lawyers
The
loved
second
it.
half of the show is the court case that she goes through, so that there is a case argued in it. And I think for anyone with a law background, it's been really interesting watching them work through the case and come to their own conclusions about it.
And they'd tell me some really horrific stories afterwards. But it was so fascinating to see. They were telling it like it was a great game, you know, of like, oh, I was in this one and the woman was on the stand for 6 weeks, and you go, oh my God. And they, you know, it's just, to them, they're like sort of Tessa at the start of the show, you know, like this is their job. It's the game they've been taught to win, and it's really like an adrenaline rush of sort of winning that game. So yeah, it was great.
I might circle back to that in a second, but I wanted to ask, and Kim, this is to all of you, but the one-person show.
Don't do it.
It's a tricky beast, isn't it? It's a really tricky. And Renee Mulder, the designer, isn't here tonight, probably thankfully so, because there is nowhere to hide up here. This is it, isn't it? There's no screen, there's no curtain, there's no wigs. It's just you up here. Can you guys talk to me about the experience of putting on a one-person show? And perhaps for us, how's it different when you are in an ensemble of maybe 5 or 6 people rocking up every day to a rehearsal room or to a performance, and it's just you creating the show between yourselves? Can you talk to me about that?
It's an up and down experience. I mean, I've got a healthy enough ego to love working with myself. But the problem is, when it goes wrong, it's only my fault. I don't get to yell at someone or bitch about how they drop their lines. It's all me. And that the tricky thing is often, especially if you're doing a long run, I've sort of, for my money's worth, with a show, 8 shows a week, you have 3 super wins, 3 okay shows, and 2 that are dogs. That's just how it is in the scheme of things as an actor.
No.
You don't know what it's like up there. You do.
What I do know is that the job is that even a show where she goes, oh, that one was, it's amazing from our point of view. That's the difference between, don't try this at home. This is, when Sheridan talks about it, it sounds very funny, but what she would call a dog of a show is maybe where I would say it kind of go 95%.
Yeah.
You move between, the job is to move between 95% and 100. And that's like any profession. It's like surgery. It's like a legal case. When you're at the top of your game, the job is to be pretty close to that 100 every time. And yes, I can tell a difference. And actually, I can't. Kim Scott can. Kim is the stage manager. And what's important in a one-person show always is the stage manager, because this is a partnership between 2 people. The rhythm of the show is really the work of both of them. And that relationship between those 2 theatrical brains to make a whole each night, it's kind of not a one-person show, show. We call it that, but actually it never can be. Yeah. And I don't know that Sheridan would have agreed to do it again if Kim didn't do it. And I don't know if Kim would have done it again if it had been a different performer. Again, there's something between the 2 of them as performers of this show that's magic.
I want to ask about that, because do you both have like a secret ritual? Or you're like, do you do warm-ups together? How does it work? Do you guys have to check in with each other, or?
Well, to sort of finish what I was saying, it was like usually if things sort of, because when you do a 95% show, you're furious. You usually can just talk it out, with your fellow actor about, how it went. We'll do this tomorrow night. And to not have that can be you can get a bit lost. But I have that with Kim, which is great. He'll come down. After the show, we'll talk through, what worked, what was sort of maybe better the night before, and then so it's like I have my fellow actor to sort of
and we feed
off.
them cheese and red wine.
Oh yeah, my rider is cheese platters and wine, and it keeps me sane.
What about you, Kim? Do you have anything to add to that?
If we talk about the rehearsal process, I guess a lot of it was just about managing stamina for a one-person show. That's the difference between a one-person show and an ensemble show. In an ensemble show, maybe you're working 7, 8 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week. This one, we do as much as Sheridan could handle on that day, and we judge it kind of. So instead of scheduling overall, we would schedule according to what Sheridan needed. Not necessarily what she wanted, but what she needed.
By 4 p.m, useless, absolutely useless.
Yes, we didn't go past 4 often.
But it's also that strange thing, and I realise this as a director, when there's a one-person show, you've got your set designer and your sound designer and your lighting designer and me and Kim and other people in the room looking at one person. So there's this whole bank of people and one person in the middle of that. And sometimes as the play goes along, of course, our faces get blanker and blanker because we're thinking about other things and working. And so there's zero response by the time you open. And so the lovely thing is once there's an actual audience is the sheer relief on Sheridan's face, because she stopped getting a good response from me like 3 weeks ago. We're not laughing at anything anymore because it's not funny, it's just what she does.
Staring at her like this.
looking at once she puts the costume on, going, is that actually going to work? Do I like that jacket? Do I want a different one? And so she can't use us as audience information anymore. So the relief with a one-person show when you finally have an audience, you're like, finally people are actually seeing the show, paying attention to the show, as opposed to the edge of the stage.
I do remember the first time we were rehearsing it, we'd chat, we call it anecdote hour, where everyone, watches YouTube videos, talks, just sort of avoids rehearsing. But as we were getting further in and getting closer to the really confronting scenes, it was so sort of palpable that when we weren't sort of ready to go there, so we'd talk for longer and longer until one day it was like midday. I was like, I've got to get up, don't I? I have to do this scene. But it was sort of that kind of thing, is important to sort of building that a safety in a space to have sort of everyone. I had a funny moment coming back to do the show, and I was just running lines on my own, and I realised that usually you'd get 4 weeks to sort of really I guess I'd call it fall into the hard stuff, where you sort of jump off the cliff and you're in and you're there. And I was overwhelmed the fact that I had to do it in a couple of days, and it was sort of my body almost went into fight or flight of going, oh, you don't have that barrier, and I had to sort of really mentally go, I sort of went back and remembered that sort of safe space that we'd made to be able to kind of fall in.
I'm going to incant the spirit of Suzie Miller one more time. I asked her how much of the play is actually true, and whether it was based on one particular real story or, as Leah said, a combination of stories of her experience. And she says, the story is all legally true. It's hard to make it interesting when I had to also put in legal details. So audiences have a basic understanding of how the courts work. But I was lucky because there was no one else in the rehearsal room who had legal experience. So the fact was that I had to write it so that it made sense to Lee, Sheridan and Kim, our amazing stage manager. Once they got it, I felt that audiences could understand the legal stuff in the play. The hard part for me as a writer was knowing what to leave out and to be concise but also legally true for a legally trained audience. There are a few little legal jokes and lingo in there that only lawyers will get, but mostly this is a play for non-lawyers. My question to you three is, how did you go entering the legal courtroom? Did you find that you had to, how important was it to hold the mantle of, like, I don't know, the legal system on your shoulders? Or did you just kind of figure it all out and go, we'll just go with the story? Like, did you learn a lot about the courts and stuff before you jumped up on the floor? Or how much of that is in there or was necessary for you to be able to do this?
I did. I had to understand it. I went and watched a lot of court cases, which was super interesting and also fascinating when you realise what theatre it really is. And I watched a lot of docos as well, but because it is so, I think what happens to that person on the witness stand is the bamboozlement of the lingo and the jargon and the process, and I had to understand both sides to sort of be able to sit there and make, at least 10 people in a courtroom. So yeah, I did a lot of research in that way.
Yeah, amazing. What about you, Lee?
No, actually, I didn't.
Yeah.
I have done various bits of research over the years insofar as court cases in the legal world, but Suzie, she's an excellent brain, and I trusted her. I went, this is all right, right? She went, yes. And then I looked at her partner, who is a High Court judge, Supreme Court judge, not High Court, Supreme Court judge. And I went, this is right, right? He said, yeah, I've checked it. And I just went with that. Yeah. So at certain points, in certain ways, you have to trust your playwright. You can't second guess them in things that they know better than you. I asked all the silly questions, but I put myself in the audience in that way, going, what does that mean? Can I get that? And I stayed in that place rather than fact-checking in a way.
And they were usually logic-based questions rather than legal questions.
Logically speaking, if she says that and then that, does that add up? Does it make sense to me? Can I follow? And that was more useful to Suzie than any question. It was really about how do I understand this moment, and stayed very much in that way. So I did a lot of work in the do I actually understand, and what is my understanding, and how does that move through, so that clarity was the most important thing, so that we didn't feel lost when we weren't supposed to feel lost. Yeah.
I'm going to come to the audience in about 2 questions' time. I asked playwright Suzie Miller, I said, what do you want to ask your crew? You're not here, so get involved. What would you like to ask these guys? And so she's got 2 questions. The first one is for Sheridan. And she says, Sheridan, how do you manage to inhabit such an intense character all on your own up there on stage, and yet then also manage to come off the stage each night and be Sheridan again? Lovely, warm, laughing Sheridan. I mean, obviously we've discovered the cheese plate and the red wine. That helps.
I think there is a lot of ritual around theatre that we forget is there, that makes it quite a safe thing to do. The very act of a bow at the end of the show does a lot for me. It's such a release. If I just walked off with no bow, I think the mental health of this whole thing
Applause, let's be honest. You like applause.
It's the applause, I'll admit, it's the ballet. But I think that ritual of the lights changing and the whole audience sort of putting a full stop together on a story is really, really important.
There's a thing too, there's a bubble that I can wrap around an actor when we add in lights and sound and the darkness. There's something that's very protective about that. It insulates it from the real world. This is a terrible play to rehearse. Coming in over 5 weeks, day in, day out, dwelling in it was hard. Once it was all together, and then with everything done wrapped around, it got a lot easier. Harder to do, gymnastically speaking, but actually much easier than the dwelling and the talking and the dissecting. That's the difficult space.
That's true. The rehearsals are the hardest, and your lights up. You're in your own clothes. There's less of a barrier that's made. You go home. You're there with your partner, your dog. You're muttering lines on buses and in parks. There's not that kind of there's not a clean kind of stepping in and stepping out. Costumes do a lot. I know that all sounds silly, but the very act of a pair of shoes it sort of makes your world, and then you take them off and you're out. But you build that resilience over years of doing things like that. Yeah.
You go to Edinburgh, you do your one-person show in Edinburgh. That makes you tough. There is a thing about that, about and why Sheridan. In the conversation had started with another actor, and when we lost that actor, it was like, can we do this? And there are a handful of people in the country who'd be ready to do this. I mean, people would think they would want to, but are they actually ready to take this on board safely, so that it's actually a theatrical experience and not a self-harm experience, really? And that's the skill. That's the years on stage. That's the small audiences for big shows. It's all of that stuff. It's the vocal capacity. It's musicals. It's all of that stuff that comes into it that says, okay, I can actually do this well and safely. And if it hadn't been Sheridan, I honestly don't know who I would have been thinking of. So I do remember that phone call to you saying, I really want you to do it, but I really need you to give me an answer fast. And you're like, okay.
Lee, question from Suzie. You ready for this one? Yes. It's very ominous, isn't it? You have this amazing quality to know just how far to push writers in their work and how to encourage them to go beyond what feels safe. And yet at the same time, it never feels like you're pushing them. Do you have an extra sense for this, or is it something you do without realising?
Look, I've worked a lot with new plays and new writers, and that's not necessarily just on first plays, but writers who haven't had their first big professional show. And knowing how hard that can be for writers and what pressure it is on them, I guess I tend to know them for quite a while before I go, I think you can manage your main stage show, that you can wield it as opposed to be subject to it. And I suppose that's probably knowing them helps insofar as knowing where they're up to as writers and how you can talk to them. Because honestly, there's no writer is the same. I wish they were, but and I wish there was a way of making a play. There isn't. So you've kind of got to follow along behind them and kind of, I don't know, maybe it is an intuitive thing, I don't know. But I knew with Suzie had written a lot and a lot of different types of stories, and what I'd found in her writing is that she's very unafraid of emotion, because she'd worked as a lawyer and a legal aid lawyer in complex family law cases. She just knew she knows people's lives and how messy they are, and she's really not afraid of representing that, which is quite different to a lot of colder writers. So she's emotionally really rich, and she'd done big stories, and I suppose I've been waiting for her big play to hit. And it was interesting to me that she went into a legal space, because that was bringing together her whole life, both as a lawyer and a writer. And I just went, come on, there's more in there. And I don't know what that more was, but I said it, and not much more than that, and that was what she needed and wanted to hear. I
like
think
a personal
permission.
trainer, like a personal
Well, sort
trainer.
of.
Drop and give me 20. No.
Well, kind
okay.
of. Well, like that thing of, permission. Sometimes writers, especially when they're writing a new work and it's something that they haven't seen before. Actually, there's this I went to the Tim Burton exhibition down in Melbourne many years ago. It turns out when he was sort of 7 or 8 years old, there was a letter. Did you see it? He wrote a letter to Disney, to the Disney Corporation, I think it was, asking, sent a work in, saying, I think I can do this, what do you think of my work? And there was a typed letter back that he got from someone in the Disney company with dramaturgical feedback to a 7-year-old saying, we do, like you, and it was this, he'd animated in crayons, or pencils, and it said, it was a respectful response that said, for the materials you have, you've displayed an impressive skill. And for a 7-year-old, it was impressive. But what it said was, what we found was that your work was derivative. And gave them another word, and I have to go back to my notes to find what it was. And obviously the 7-year-old, talented 7-year-old, went to someone in their life and said, what's derivative? And it means I've seen it before. So if it's something we've seen before, you've taken it, and that's okay. But when you're actually trying to write something original, something you haven't seen before, how do you do that? And you watched in his drawing, he started trying to draw things he'd never seen before. Because someone said to him as a 7-year-old, gave him the word derivative, and he didn't want to be derivative. He wanted to draw things he hadn't seen. And that's what playwrights are trying to do when they're writing a new play. They're not trying to write something that is derived from someone else's ideas. They're trying to write something they haven't seen. And sometimes it's just about permission to do that. Yeah. And if they're onto something, go further. Great. Yeah, so that's, I don't know, so you're fishing for something that we all haven't seen before. Sometimes it's fine. Some plays you have seen before, it's just another good version of the same kind of story. But especially when you're talking about political works, they're pushing us into ideas that we might not have had before or expressed as a society. Stories that we've seen a version of this story, like you said, you've seen the present plot point version of it, but not necessarily this expression of it. Go further, want more. Because all I am is a first audience. When I read those scripts, I'm reading them before they would ever come to you, and I go, if there's something I want and I want more of it, that's just like sitting in an audience going, oh, I wish that had gone a bit further. So I'm the first person to say that, I suppose. Yeah. So I don't know what that adds up to for someone like Suzie, but there was something, she was ready for her big play, where she added together all her knowledge as a woman and a writer and a lawyer, all of it. And it's interesting when she said she was scared. She was putting everything on the line.
For this play in particular, the section that we spent most time on, because when we started, it wasn't the final script that we have now. We spent at least two and a bit weeks redrafting, and the first half came together a lot more quickly. But the section that we stayed with a lot and pushed was the voir dire.
Yeah, oh, that's right, the voir dire, which comes
That
at
was
the end of the play.
last bit that
Fell
that she
into
kind of-
place, yeah. And it was also complicated because Suzie had just lost, her mother had just passed away. It happened in rehearsal, that's right. So she was in this very strange there and not there space, and we needed this last piece to fall into place, that's right.
It's this section of direct address, but it just lets fly, and we needed Susie's voice to her fullest capacity. So
And she came back, and she had this one window of time that she could write it, and this thing came back, pages more, and Sheridan just went, "I hate you," and then read it and went, "I love this." I could use this. I know where this is going, because there was such a clarity.
That's when I went, I'm not rehearsing tomorrow. I'm just going to go learn this in a corner. That's what we did.
And we all went, "Okay, Sheridan."
So much fodder and amazing, stories up here. Any questions in the audience for any of these brilliant creatives? Yes, up the back, purple. Hello. What do you want audiences to take away from this show? Oh, that's
Fire. I want them to take away fire. That there is something waking up in society at the moment in us, and I want this to be a bit of fire.
good. What about you, Sheridan?
I think, I don't want to sort of give away the end of the show, but there's a really excellent and startling proposition that Suzie gives the audience at the end of the play. That is a really, once she says it out loud, there's also another line in the show where she says, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And once this proposition comes out, you go, oh my God, this is so obvious. And that is really the call to arms of the show, and it's quite simple. It's an interrogation of these laws that we have made up ourselves. And I think that's a big thing that Suzie gets to at the end of, we've made these laws up, we've made the system up. It's not some holy thing that's come down from the sky. We made them, so if they're not serving us, and we know statistically they're not finding justice. I think it's 1 in 10 cases will come through with a guilty verdict at present. So clearly justice is not happening. 9 women are not making up a story and doing a false accusation. So why are we not interrogating and asking our lawmakers to change these laws if they actually don't serve justice? I want people to have fire and be angry about that proposition, that we're not interrogating it.
What about you, Kim? Anything you want to add to that? Or?
I want people to walk away with a recognition of their love of theatre and storytelling, because that is what this is. It's one woman telling a story, and the capacity for change in this form is quite remarkable.
It does take us back to the very beginning, the Peter Brook principle of the empty space. One actor and an audience. That's actually all you need. And I'm sorry, darling, I haven't given you much more than that, have I? When she first saw the set design from Renee Mulder, she actually said, she looked for when Renee was going to put, because he would have a little model box, a scale model of the set, and it was literally black walls
is it in the car?
and this little...
Do you want me to go help me get it?
And
Where's
she said,
the set?
And she says, oh, yeah, there's a chair. Put a chair on it.
Furious.
Fury. She said, can I have a prop? I'm like, I don't know, we'll see. The look on her face.
So mad. I was like, where's my wig? I wanted the wig. I didn't get the wig.
But yeah, the belief in theatre. A writer writing words that we need to hear delivered by an actor at the top of their game in a space that loves actors and loves audience. You don't need much more than that. And yes, I mean, there is a beautiful sound design from Paul Charlier that is a voice that works with the one voice in the room. And he said that wraps around into this world, and the lighting design is all about pulling our focus towards this one figure. and then yes, of course, because we're in this beautiful theatre, we can add to it, but it's not much more than one person on a stage, which is really faith in theatre. So it's nice to remind ourselves, especially when we start rehearsal for Boy Swallows Universe on Monday next week, which is at the opposite extreme, the other sort of theatre. And they're both valid and beautiful.
They'll
and I
get
love
props. I bet they have props.
Darling, I'm
And
so
wigs.
sorry. They get lots of props and they get lots of costume changes and they get
Wigs.
wigs, and a double revolve and food, and they get AV design. Sorry, they get a choreographer.
I get a wheelie chair that spins.
That's something. It's the small things. Anyone else? Any other questions over here? Yes. How does that work?
The way that Suzie sort of done it is that the other people are talking and I'm giving their voices too in sort of various forms. I don't fully inhabit them as other characters, but more give them through Tessa's perspective of sort of placing them. So by that final scene, I am sitting in the witness stand and these people are there with me. So it becomes quite three-dimensional in certain parts of it. But a lot of it is her inner monologue, which is what makes it very interesting. Yeah,
we move in and out of her head. We move in and out of her judgments of various people. We hear them speak, and then we see her reaction to what they've said. So it's very fluid in that way, and it does take us inside her brain without it feeling interior. It's very active play.
Yeah.
You do get into it, and very
she
fast
is
moving. Yeah.
going through life quite rapidly until sort of an event takes place that kind of shatters her flow.
Side swipes.
Yeah, and then it's her sort of piecing things back together.
Any other questions from this bank? What about this bank? Yes, up the back, sir. So the question is, with such a small window, how do we evoke the court, or how do we bring in are there any other scenes or?
Yes. So the play doesn't start there at all. The play starts with her as a young lawyer, running different cases, explaining the law to us, and explaining sort of a bit of her life. We go back. We go to her mum's house. We go to her apartment. We have conversations with friends overseas. So there's it definitely builds her life before, and then we're taken into the courtroom in the second half.
It's like 2.5 years it covers, isn't it? Yeah.
2.5 years.
Yeah.
Which is generally about the time that it takes to bring a case to court. So that's why. So it's from the incident to the case.
Yes. Has anything changed in the production since its last inception, internally or externally?
Australia's changed a lot since we did it the first time. I think the questions that are being asked of our legal system are being asked across different layers of our society, both governmentally within the legal system. I think some of the different court cases that are happening have influenced the audience as well. This went on stage during the Jeffrey Rush defamation case. So that's where we were at.
Day one of rehearsals was day one of that court case, which was quite chilling, really. So since then, there have been some significant cases that have also been picked up by the legal profession themselves. The question of Dyson Hayden and the impact of that. This play has been, in its first iteration, was seen by some significant figures in the legal community, and it asked questions. And again, I'm not saying that this play
cause those other things to happen. I'm saying that when that 90 minutes in the theatre for people who spend their days working in this system, to think about it in a fictional way, to see a perspective that's not connected to facts and an actual case, it provides people a different way of thinking about it. And I think that's part of that conversation. You know, it was kind of big to play it in Canberra and to know that the Chief Justice was sitting watching. That was huge. And you kind of go, it was part of the theatre world saying, we're talking about this as well. It gave permission to all sorts of audiences to talk in ways that they hadn't necessarily done. So, you know, there have been other things published. So the conversation in Australia has changed. The Me Too conversation of last year, the impact of that and how that's sitting in our culture at the moment. So we're definitely in a different place as a society. I mean, Sheridan's got a little bit older.
Heaps older. I've been through a couple of pandemics, couple of lockdowns. I'm a very different woman. But 2 years ago, there were nights in the final scene when I sort of, would put this proposition out of the sort of the challenge at the end of the show. There was a part of my brain that would get, that sort of, activist fatigue, where I'd go, really? Will it ever change? Like, will this ever happen? I thought maybe, God, 20, 30 years. Like, literally, I was like, we all go, we know, but what can we do? In that 2 years, we've now had the New South Wales Attorney General start talking about enthusiastic consent, changing those laws, and people are talking about changing how people are cross-examined. In court, they're talking about restorative justice? That's the phrase. Now, which 2 years ago no one was talking about. And this time, when they started talking about enthusiastic consent, there was no pushback like there was 10 years ago when that was brought up, where people were like, what? Are people going to actually have to say, can I? And now no one, after the Me Too movement, everyone was like, well, that makes sense. And even if that is a symbolic gesture, enthusiastic consent, it's just, I never would have thought it would happen in 2 years. So it's given me so much hope that I think when politicians are starting to stand up and talk about consent, we are in a very different place to where we were 2 years ago, and that's really exciting. So imagine what it actually will be in 10 years if we'll be doing restorative justice. It's very exciting.
We have time for a couple more questions. Any other questions over here that anyone wants to ask? Or yes, second row. So
Can we put that in? Can I have it? Kim just comes down with a trolley, a bar.
The question is, what does it mean by the term safe space, and how is that created in the rehearsal room? Does it involve a cheese platter?
I don't literally get a safe space on stage. More just sort of mentally, emotionally, and physically being ready to jump into the more gnarly scenes in the play. It's not something I could just jump into. I had to really kind of marinate in the world and make relationships in the rehearsal room before we sort of touched on those really hard scenes. And that sort of, built up a resilience that I could take to the theatre.
And there's also, when there's some dark stuff, and that's across all sorts of plays, and sometimes I don't think playwrights, when they're writing in a difficult space, they don't necessarily, it's difficult for them, but they don't necessarily know what they're asking an actor to do. They don't know the cost of it. They know the cost for themselves as they're writing, but they don't know what they're asking. And so sometimes I look at it as direction. I kind of go, okay, so how do I get the room ready so that the actor feels like they can, well, when you first start doing it, you're reading it and it's not great. You're trying out stuff. You've got to be able to try it out before it's good. But the better it gets, the more it actually affects you. And it's that funny thing, it's not for this play, but I know that when I'm working with blood, you've got to sort of work up to it. And so you do a run with just water so that people get used to the wetness, right? And then you you wait a while, and then I always try to do a run with blood in the rehearsal room, even though it means a lot of cleaning up afterwards, because if you get the blood mixture right, your body doesn't know the difference between the colour of blood and fake blood. So your body reacts like it's real blood. So people sometimes have physical reactions to blood. That makes them sick, it makes them a little bit dizzy. Some people can't manage it. So you've got to let people rehearse that so that they're not going out and doing that for the first time in front of an audience, because they've kind of got to build up a capacity to manage that, to know that it's going to happen. What have I got to do? And it's the same thing with some tough sentences. You've got to kind of let it be not real first, not great, and kind of go, oh yeah, right, I'm going to have to get that better. And then wait for the actor to kind of get to the point where they're going to do it. And you run a scene and then you go, do I need to keep going? Do they need to stay in it, or do they need to step out of it? And when we step out of it, how big a break? Do you want to go straight again? Do you want to try it again, do another draft? Or do you want to have a tea break and have a Tim Tam? You know, how do we keep it from not hurting too much? And how much of it do you do in a day? And I suppose some actors will build up just some little techniques, and sometimes comedy is part of that. You break out and you make a comment about something and the whole room laughs, and then it's how you shake it off so that you're not carrying the awfulness with you beyond when you need it. But you do need to activate it, and you kind of got to take care of your body and your brain, because when you're in it, your body doesn't necessarily know the difference emotionally, and so you've got to find ways to stop the reaction.
Performance-wise, there's an interesting thing where I know every time I perform the show, statistically, that there will be more than one survivor in the room. And sometimes it creeps in as a thought as I'm doing something, the actual reality of it, and that can be quite a lot. You know, I panic that I'm doing them justice. You know, I panic about if I'm doing the right thing for them. So I do feel like I had to be very well-read, knowledgeable about the law in that way, and also what they might have been through, to sort of become at that moment I feel like a de facto sort of advocate. So I had to be very careful about sort of.
You're also
being
trying to
strong.
take care of the lawyers in the room too, because as a well, yeah. Well, no, there are some extraordinary lawyers who work in this space and who carry a lot for us as a society. They look at the face of what we do to each other as humans, and they go, like, they manage that, and you want to do a good job for them too. You want to represent them well with the difficulty that they choose to take on in their role. And sometimes you look out and you see people who are working in the law, in different layers of the law, and sometimes it's a bit close to the bone. You know, there's theatre. We're used to going to theatre which tells other people's stories, but when it's actually telling something very close to your story, what stuff that you manage at work, it's not just about being a subject of assault. It's actually about being someone that works with people who have suffered that. It's just a bit close, and that's the amazing thing about theatre, is that sometimes it can come very close to us. A fiction will be almost us, but that's also kind of awful, and that's managing it for them too, honouring them in their profession, I think, is also important. Questioning it, sure, that's what the play does, but giving it an integrity of performance, I think, is a way of giving back to them for what they do for us.
We're going to sneak in one more question. Oh, this person was like, yes, me. Yes, question. The composition of the audience, does it make an impact on the actor or the work?
We had one night in Sydney, and I think we're doing it again, that was only females who worked in the law. It was terrifying.
It's not only this time. There will be some men
great.
in the audience, but this is a night when we actually focus on women in the law and have a conversation afterwards about generationally where they're at, because we had some very young lawyers and students of law, and then, some retired judges. And the question of a life in the law and what's changed and what hasn't changed, that was an extraordinary conversation to have. But yes, there was
just
that was
felt
hard.
like such a piece of crap.
There were
They were
no, but at the end they were like, "This isn't fiction. This is our lives."
Yeah.
And you go, "Yeah, okay. So how are you with this? And what do you want to talk about?" And that conversation I will always remember. For what they'd learned across their lives and how powerless they felt to change the very system that they work in. And that was a very interesting conversation. There was also a really there were a few interesting shows where teachers at boys' schools had brought their students to see it. And those were really fascinating conversations afterwards as well, for young men to kind of be inside the head of a woman, to have that insight. They actually really enjoyed that. But the play does take a turn, and you can't necessarily see it coming. And I was watching this young man sitting in the back row of the audience, and he'd got his Coke and he'd got his potato chips, and he's sitting back and he's eating these potato chips, and I'm like, that's okay, you're not going to starve to death in the 90 minutes. You don't have to have chips. Anyway, he's eating his chips, it's fine. And there was just this point where I knew the play was about to turn, and he's in, and he goes, picks it up and he goes, and I watched him hold that chip near his mouth for a good 10 minutes. It was just, he was not expecting that, and he was so mesmerised the chip did not make it to his mouth for a long time. And I'm sorry, I wasn't watching you, I was watching the chip. Because I just was fascinated. There was a moment when there was in that man's life where literally his body was arrested, and he wasn't thinking, don't eat the chip, it was just hovering there. And I kind of loved that moment, that he was enchanted on some visceral way, to the point where he couldn't put that piece of food in his mouth. And I kind of go, that was amazing. And that impact that, again, one person on a stage can have. And I go, because I have memories of that, of being young in the theatre and having something punch through me so hard I would never forget it. And I kind of go, yeah, we did that. And so I'm really interested in reaching out to a lot of the teachers that come here and say, definitely bring your younger students to this. Not year 7s and 8s, but definitely 16 and up. You're a blink away from voting. I want you thinking at this level of complexity, on an empathy level, so that you're actually capable of making, informed choices in your voting. I want that level of complexity in your heads at 16 or 17. I didn't have it, but that's what I wanted my theatre to do. So when I see school groups in, it makes a huge difference to me. I want them to be seeing it, especially young men, because of the opportunity it gives them to see inside the head of a woman. That's what the play does. Yeah.
Sheridan and Kim, I'm going to introduce you now to a Queensland theatre tradition, and it is the Raffle. So please procure your tickets, everyone. And Sheridan, I might get you to do the honours.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Please.
All right. Everyone, tickets out, and we will, like last time, contribute to a drum roll. So when we're ready, let's, everyone, tickets out, and let's do our... The winner is...
B91 Orange. Orange B91.
Anyone?
Yay!
Yes! You can collect your prize. I'll tell you what you've won. You have won a $100 food and beverage voucher to Newstead Brewing Co., which can be used at either one of their brew pubs in Newstead or Milton. Thank you so much to our season partners at Brewing Co. You can collect that in a moment. Now, if you're interested in coming along to that Women in the Law chat, I think it's going to be quite exciting. That's happening immediately following the PRIMA FACIE performance on Monday, July 26th. It's going to be co-hosted by the Women's Lawyers Association of Queensland, and we're encouraging members of Brisbane's legal community to join us. So if you know any lawyers, tell them to come along. Finally, to conclude this evening, in case you needed any more reason to come to this show, I just wanted to read this suite of reviews. The Sydney Morning Herald says that Sheridan Harbridge is superb as Tessa, combative, controlled and clear-sighted. Audrey Journal says that this is a steely play overlaid with delicate, insightful and emotional work. And Time Out says Prima Facie gives a platform for a woman to speak her truth. This is an urgent and compelling work, one that should be as widely seen for its craft, just as much as its subject matter should be better understood by our politicians, lawmakers and general public. Run, don't walk. We are so looking forward to sharing this incredible work with you, and we can't wait to see you in the theatre. Thank you so much. Stay safe, and we'll see you in season. Bye, everyone.